Buckle up. What you're about to discover will fundamentally alter your understanding of where the American economy stands right now and where it's heading over the next 12 months. While financial media celebrates stock market records and politicians promise economic prosperity, a catastrophic convergence of banking fragility, unsustainable debt dynamics, and structural labor market deterioration is building toward what some analysts are characterizing as an approaching fiscal death spiral. Let me walk you through the data nobody wants you to see. The $482 billion banking catastrophe. Here's where it gets interesting. U.S. banks are currently holding $482 billion in unrealized losses on investments and securities, primarily long-term treasury bonds and mortgage-backed securities. According to institutional research from the Federal Reserve stress test scenarios published in mid-2025, several regional banks would breach minimum Tier 1 capital ratios under adverse conditions featuring rapid rate cuts and asset price declines. Think about what happened back in 2008 during the Lehman Brothers collapse. Now picture this. These institutions loaded up on supposedly safe treasury bonds when rates were near 0%. But as the Fed jacked rates to 5.25 through 5.50% to combat inflation that peaked at 8.5% in September 2022, those same assets cratered in value. They cannot easily sell these assets without realizing catastrophic losses, which restricts their ability to lend and impairs institutional-grade liquidity across the entire financial system, risking additional economic contraction or outright financial instability. Remember the 2022 Terra crash? Here's how this banking situation is even more dangerous. Held-to-maturity accounting shields these losses from immediate balance sheet recognition, but any forced sales triggered by deposit flight, regulatory stress tests, or interest rate reversals would crystallize these losses instantly, straining capital buffers and curtailing credit availability across the economy. This is the equivalent of having a ticking time bomb hidden in every major bank's vault, and the timer is running. Jamie Dimon's warning and the consumer spending illusion. Now pay close attention. JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon and other financial leaders have been sending subtle signals that most investors are completely missing. Personal consumption expenditures climbed 0.6% in August, following a 0.5% gain in July, led by services such as travel, dining, and recreation. When adjusted for inflation, real spending rose 0.4% last month, reflecting robust demand among higher-income groups. But here's the kicker you need to understand. Consumer sentiment slipped to near-record lows in September, yet spending held firm. This massive disconnect reveals everything. High-income households, buoyed by rising wages and asset values, continue spending freely on luxury travel and entertainment, while lower-income families face tightening budgets as essentials consume larger shares of disposable income. I've been analyzing this divergence in my live streams for months, comparing it to how my Tesla Model X battery performs after 225,000 kilometers. The headline range looks acceptable at 355 kilometers retained, but when you examine cell-level degradation patterns and voltage inconsistencies under load, you discover stress fractures forming that aren't visible in surface metrics. The American consumer is exhibiting the exact same pattern. The Federal Reserve's impossible choice. The Fed is cutting rates at the October 28th through 29th FOMC meeting with 100% market certainty, bringing the federal funds target to 4.00 through 4.25%. But according to Federal Reserve data, unemployment hit 4.3% in August 2025, the highest since October 2021. And employers added only 22,000 net positions, well below consensus forecasts of 80 to 100,000 monthly hires. This changes everything. Annual revisions to employment data revealed that from April 2024 to March 2025, the U.S. economy created 911,000 fewer jobs than initially reported. That's nearly 1 million phantom jobs that never actually existed. Treasury Department sources confirmed these downward adjustments underscore fragility in services, technology, and manufacturing sectors critical for counterparty risk mitigation in corporate credit markets. Here's where it gets wild. With the 2-year Treasury yielding 4.75% and the 10-year yielding 4.80%, the yield curve is approaching inversion that historically signals recession risks 12 to 18 months ahead. A flat curve elevates corporate borrowing costs and influences discount rates used in valuing longer-term crypto projects and blockchain infrastructure development. If crypto were a movie, this yield curve inversion is the plot twist that changes the entire third act. Mega reveal: the trillion-dollar annual debt drain. All right, here's the moment I promised, and I'm speechless every time I look at these numbers. Interest payments on federal debt have climbed sharply, exceeding $1 trillion in 2024, surpassing defense spending for the first time in modern American history. The Congressional Budget Office projects annual net interest costs could reach 3% of GDP by 2026, the highest proportion since the mid-1990s. Let that sink in. We are spending more money annually just to service existing debt than we spend on the entire military, including aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines, fighter jets, strategic missile systems, and every soldier's salary combined. Net interest expense on federal debt reached $879.9 billion in fiscal year 2024, representing 13% of all federal expenditures. And recent estimates indicate costs have crossed the $1 trillion threshold. Some analysts characterize this dynamic as approaching a fiscal death spiral, where debt service costs grow faster than the economy's ability to generate revenue to pay them. These elevated debt burdens crowd out investments in infrastructure, education, healthcare, strategic technology initiatives, and deficit reduction. For cryptocurrency investors, this reinforces Bitcoin's narrative as digital gold resistant to sovereign default risk, and Ethereum's positioning as programmable collateral within decentralized autonomous finance ecosystems. The manufacturing mirage, a 10% fantasy. Now, here's the twist that shocked me when I dug deep into the research. Manufacturing represents only 10% of U.S. GDP in 2025, with approximately 13 million workers employed in the sector. We are attempting to reshore an entire industrial base for a segment that constitutes 1/10 of economic activity, while consumer spending, at 69%, dominates everything. According to institutional research from trade policy think tanks, even full reshoring of the manufacturing trade deficit would generate at most 2.8 million additional jobs, raising manufacturing's share of total U.S. employment from 7.9% to just 9.6%. After all the political rhetoric, tariff wars, and supply chain disruption, best-case scenario adds less than 2 percentage points to manufacturing employment. China accounts for 29% of global manufacturing output as of 2023, nearly 12 percentage points more than the United States. They produce over 70% of the world's solar photovoltaic modules, nearly 75% of lithium-ion batteries, and more than half of global EV output. When I researched lithium extraction from seawater using cementation processes for a university presentation on materials engineering, I discovered just how completely China dominates the entire battery value chain, from raw material extraction through cell manufacturing.
And you guys, I have a special trick for you, which nobody seems to be using, and I cannot wrap my head around why. Because if you sign up through my link down in the description onto the BTCC exchange, you get a 10% deposit bonus. And now stay with me here, Now, here comes the important part. If you have any trading capital on any other exchange and you move it to your newly created BTCC account, you get on top of your capital you moved another 10% extra trading capital. As an example, if you move or deposit 10K to your account, you get 1K for free. And here is why this is possible. BTCC makes money on trading fees. The more capital you have, the more you trade. The more you trade, the more they earn. So they are literally investing in your trading activity by giving you extra capital up front. And unlike other platforms where bonuses are in the 1 to 3% range, BTCC's bonus is a full 10%. I'm not kidding. I really don't understand why nobody is doing this. To me, it really seems like people sometimes are too lazy or just don't like free money. I kindly ask you to pause this video and take your time to make an account. You can thank me later in the description of this video.
Where America actually dominates, the services revolution. Lightbulb moment. The U.S. cannot compete on manufacturing labor costs, but American dominance in high-value services remains absolutely unmatched. Services include healthcare, professional expertise, education, software as a service, banking, and entertainment, collectively representing over 70% of GDP. Think Netflix streaming to 200 million global subscribers, Amazon Web Services powering 40% of cloud infrastructure, JP Morgan's treasury management solutions processing trillions in daily settlements, and Silicon Valley software engineering talent commanding six-figure salaries. For cryptocurrency and blockchain, this services orientation creates incredibly fertile ground. Decentralized applications in finance, gaming, and tokenized intellectual property align perfectly with America's comparative advantages. Total value locked in DeFi protocols climbed from $65 billion in January 2025 to $92 billion by August, a 41.5% increase. Ethereum staking deposits exceeded 30 million ETH by mid-2025, representing more than 25% of total supply locked in proof-of-stake contracts, with annual yields averaging 4.5%. Stablecoin circulation expanded from 150 billion at end 2024 to 185 billion in July 2025, a 23.3% increase, reinforcing their role as liquidity rails for cross-currency settlement efficiency. When I create cryptocurrency analysis videos for my YouTube channel examining XRP's on-demand liquidity corridors or Stellar's cross-border payment infrastructure, audience engagement spikes when we discuss real-world use cases in remittance cost reduction and foreign exchange volatility hedging rather than abstract consensus mechanisms. State-by-state economic fragmentation, the hidden recession. According to Moody's Analytics, states accounting for 1/3 of U.S. GDP are already in a recession or at high risk as of mid-2025. Another third are holding water with stagnant growth, and only the remaining third are expanding. California, Texas, and New York, collectively over 22% of national GDP, fall into the holding water category, meaning their relative stability rather than robust growth props up aggregate figures. That just happened. By September 2025, analyses indicated 22 states were officially in recession based on consecutive quarters of declining activity, with particular weakness in states dependent on manufacturing, energy extraction, and agriculture. Without the anchoring effect of these three mega economies, national output would deteriorate substantially. This fragmented picture contradicts narratives of broad-based health and suggests vulnerability to cascading failures if the largest state economies weaken. The housing crisis destroying millennial wealth. Here's something personal that hits my generation hard. Only 21% of millennials believe they can afford homeownership in 2025, a catastrophic decline from 52% in 2024. The median U.S. home price hovers near $420,000, yet 68% of millennial buyers target homes under $400,000. Mortgage rates averaging 7.5% compared to sub-3% in 2021 have crushed affordability. Homelessness has broken records, reaching 800,000 U.S. citizens. 3 years of elevated inflation running at 2.9% in August, with core inflation at 3.41%, have left daily life unaffordable for half of Americans. Locked out of real estate appreciation, millennials perceive conventional wealth-building paths as blocked and increasingly turn to cryptocurrency as accessible investment opportunity requiring minimal capital to enter. Bitcoin and Ethereum, the institutional hedge. Given banking sector unrealized losses, soaring debt service costs, labor market deterioration, and geographic fragmentation, the case for alternative stores of value has never been stronger. Bitcoin defied typical seasonality by gaining 8% in September 2025, its strongest September since 2012. From around $42,000 in January 2025, it surged to $68,000 by June 2025, outpacing equities and gold amid the launch of U.S. spot Bitcoin ETFs. ETF inflows totaled $5.4 billion between January and July 2025, averaging $770 million per month. The Grayscale Bitcoin Trust conversion unlocked approximately $10 billion in locked-up capital. Spot Bitcoin ETFs in the U.S. and Canada witnessed combined assets under management surpassing $50 billion by mid-2025, with inflows accelerating immediately after dovish Fed commentary. Ethereum's proof-of-stake transition enhanced throughput to over 4,000 transactions per second on Layer 2 solutions, while reducing costs to under 1 cent per transfer. Tokenized real-world assets exceeded $21 billion in total value, up 245-fold over 5 years. Cross-chain bridges enabled token transfers, moving over $350 billion in assets by mid-2025. The verdict: prepare for unprecedented turbulence. The implications are staggering. The U.S. economy is circling a critical inflection point. Elevated long-term interest rates drive unrealized banking losses totaling $482 billion. Elevated tariffs burden businesses and consumers with $183.6 billion in extraction. Collapsed agricultural exports devastate rural communities. Cooling labor markets with 911,000 phantom jobs threaten consumption-driven growth, accounting for 69% of GDP. Rate cuts will commence, but structural challenges extending decades require coordinated fiscal, monetary, and industrial policy responses far beyond quarterly Fed decisions. For investors, this environment demands diversification with strategic allocations to digital assets offering portfolio benefits and risk-adjusted returns uncorrelated to traditional equities. On-demand liquidity corridors, real-time gross settlement platforms, and ISO 2010-22 compliant payment rails position leading cryptocurrencies as institutional-grade infrastructure for the next era of global finance. Nothing in this video should be taken as financial advice. This is for entertainment and educational purposes only. I'm not a financial advisor. Please seek professional guidance for your situation. But the data is crystal clear. We're entering uncharted territory, and understanding how macroeconomic policy, financial system vulnerabilities, and decentralized technology intersect will determine who thrives in what's coming. If this analysis opened your eyes to what's really happening beneath the surface of stock market records and political rhetoric, absolutely crush that like button. Subscribe for weekly breakdowns of the forces reshaping finance, and drop a comment telling me which deep dive you want next: Federal Reserve policy mechanics, cryptocurrency regulatory landscape analysis, or decentralized finance's role as traditional banking fractures. Let's keep this conversation alive, because the next 12 months will define the financial landscape for the entire decade ahead.